Hi there, welcome to our video lecture series on the plant cell. But before we do that, let's just have an overview from today's lecture. So here we have a diagram of a typical plant. This is a young, say, seedling, and that plant is made up of three organs: stem, leaves, and roots. And the stem and leaves are organized into shoots. Within each of these organs, we find there are three different tissue systems. We have a dermal tissue system, which is the skin of the plant. We have the vascular tissue system, which is the system which conducts things throughout the plant. Remember, water and nutrients up from the roots to the rest of the plant, and photosynthetes from the photosynthetic parts down to the other parts of the plant. And then we have the stuff in between that's called the ground tissue system. Now, each of these tissue systems is made up of tissue types. So we have, for example, the vascular tissue system is made up of the tissues xylem and phloem. Before we get into this organizational structure, let's think a little bit about plant cells. So we're going to look at this stuff later, but we're going to take a look at plant cells now. And the most important parts of the plant cell that we're going to focus on are the vacuoles, the plastids, and the cell wall. So if we look at this figure, you saw this in lab. The vacuole is present here. We have the cell wall, which is outside of the cell, and we have the chloroplasts. And what you might say to yourself is, hey, these are features that aren't characteristic of animals, but they're very characteristic of plants. So let's take a look at vacuoles first. So vacuoles have aqueous contents. That means that most of the stuff in them is soluble in water, and they're bound by a tonoplast, which is a single membrane. They have many functions. One of the main functions is storage, and they store amino acids, proteins, sugars, organic acids, and inorganic ions. Here's a good example. This is from an embryo, and those green bodies are vacuoles that are filled with proteins. A lot of times we'll find that protein is stored in these vacuoles and is liberated as a plant begins to grow. So this is from embryonic tissue. Another important function is defense. So these vacuoles sequester nasty chemicals. I mean nasty because they're defensive. They help the plant protect themselves. That include things like alkaloids and terpenes, phenolics, and sometimes crystals. Here's some crystals here. These are calcium oxalate crystals, nice and jagged, and so you can kind of think that they perhaps aid in preventing herbivores from munching down on leaves and things like that, and that's true. We're also going to find out a little bit about some other functions later on in the course that are kind of really, really cool. Here's a cell that has long needle-like structures. These are called druses. For any of you who eat lots of pineapple, you may feel a tingling in your lips, and that's partly because they produce these little sharp needles. We'll find out a little bit more about those later on as well, but they're stored in the vacuole. So these structures, the crystals, are actually insoluble, and they crystallize within the vacuole. We have things like alkaloids, and I hope many of you aren't familiar with this plant. This is Nicotiana tabacum in the Solanaceae family, also called the deadly nightshade family, and it produces a compound called nicotine. So here's nicotine. It's a type of an alkaloid. Alkaloids are basically alkaline, so they're basic, and they have nitrogen most often in ring structures. And one of the other features of alkaloids is they cause biological responses. Okay, so which may be positive or negative. Now here's a whole bunch of Nicotiana plants drying in a field, and they're going to be used to make cigars. Here's another kind of alkaloid. Cocaine comes from erythroxylum, causes changes in human physiology. This is one of my favorites. It's a beautiful little plant. It has the most adorable capsule, and its name is henbane. And some of you may say, hey, that sounds very Shakespearean. Double, double, toil and trouble. Here's these witches making a witch's brew, and there's some henbane. This plant also belongs to the Solanaceae, the deadly nightshade family, that produce many, many different kinds of alkaloids. It's my favorite family, actually, because it produces naughty but also nice plants. So potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and all that belong to this family as well. So I think of it as the naughty and nice family, plant family. Caffeine. Yes, this is from this plant. So these are pictures I took in Vietnam, and you can see that they've got they're really aromatic flowers, and here is the coffee bean, which isn't really a bean at all. It's a berry. Another important function is reproduction. Pigments are often stored, the water-soluble ones, in vacuoles for the floral parts to promote pollination. So here you can see a wide array of different colors, pigments. Most of the pigments that are within the vacuoles are blues and reds. The yellow pigments are actually in other structures as well that we're going to talk about. Oh, this is just a picture from Tofino of a fellow named Ken Gibson, and he has the most amazing azalea and rhododendron collection. He lives on a little hill in the middle of Tofino. It's exquisite, well worth a visit. He's a very nice fellow as well. But if you were, and I don't recommend this, to make a cross section of the petals of his azaleas, you might find here's a leaf cell right here, and this purple part is the vacuole, and you can see it's got lots of pigment in it. Now some pigments are kind of neat in that they change color depending upon pH. And so if you were to go, say, outside St. Paul's Hospital when the hydrangeas were in bloom, it's all the same plant, but we have some with blue flowers and some with pink flowers. And what regulates this is the pH that's within the vacuole. We're going to look at this next day in class. Very cool, eh? Oh, and protection. So there's pigments that are used to protect against UV damage. Often you'll find young buds or aging leaves will change color as well, will become brilliant. Often purples and oranges, which are things like carotenoids that help to protect against UV damage. And vacuoles are really important for recycling breakdown products of macromolecules and organelles, and really important in cell growth as well as support. So if you think about your plants, if you don't water them for a while, they kind of get sad looking, get a bit droopy. Add water, poof, they perk up again, and that's because the vacuole engorges itself with water once again. So let's take a look at cell growth. So what you can see here, this funny little diagram here is an apical meristem. So the very tip top of the plant, or it could be the very tip top of the root as well, where you have lots and lots of cell divisions happening, and so the cells are really quite compact. So it's a region of cell division, but then we have a region of growth. And what happens here is that the vacuoles start to enlarge. And so you can imagine that this region is going to elongate because these cells are getting longer because that vacuole is filling up with water. Okay, well, thank you very much. That concludes our discussion on vacuoles. Tune in because we're going to be talking about plastids next. Ciao for now.